Vlashel. Thank you to all of you for this opportunity to study a little bit together. Yes, it's about 1:05 in the morning, so if my words start getting a little slurred, you'll understand. And greetings to all your students and to your various rabbis running this program. Let me just ask you to raise your hand if you can hear me. Everybody, can you all hear me? Okay, good. So I've got a chat box open here. You're very welcome to type in a question. Later, if you want to just unmute yourself and ask a question, that'll be fine. But let me first paint a broad picture of the question I've been asked to talk about, which is triage and particularly related to the COVID situation. Can you raise your hand, please, if you're a medical student or professional or anything medical about you? Right, okay, good. Yeah, just give me a quick indication, just... Okay, fine. All right, so let me try and present to you the fascination of this area. I will talk a little bit about triage criteria in general, hardcore triage based on a particular case, which I think you'll find very interesting. And if there's time, we can broaden it to the much broader issue about needs of a community as opposed to individuals. So what I'm going to talk about is two people. You can only save one of them. How does Judaism approach the question of deciding which one you save? Then if there's time, we can talk a little bit about the problem of how do you prioritize a community in general, which is also a very, very important triage question. People locked down, which means you risk people if you release the lockdown. People could get infected. On the other hand, locking down a community is a community issue. People's livelihoods, they're psychological. There are many, many soft, I would say, soft issues that you suffer when you lock down a community. How does Judaism look at that? But let's start with a specific question of triage in general. If you'd like, you're welcome to email me for more details at any point. I wrote a book about this, actually. Might as well promote my own book. That's called Dangerous Disease and Dangerous Therapy in Jewish Medical Ethics. This deals with all the dangerous issues and how much risk is allowed in various medical situations. I was also an army officer, a medical officer in the South African Army during a time when there was a war, terrorist war going on. In fact, the first day I arrived in that border zone, two of my friends were shot. One survived, one died. You know, so I was a military officer, a military doctor at a time of where triage was a real issue. You know, people being injured and having to decide whom you save. I've been through a lot of that. So this book actually goes into a lot of detail about triage criteria. But let me try and give you an approach to this question. First of all, what do we mean by triage? And then I'll set a problem, a real-time problem that happened as it happens in South Africa. And we'll try and work through that, learning the principles. That's agreeable to everyone? Can we do that? That's our agenda? Okay, so here's the concept. Triage means selection of people to save. It's an old Napoleonic Wars term. It came to the fore in very, very large way in the First World War. Thousands of people injured. No way you could treat them all. And the simplest method of triage in those days was simply divide people into three groups. The walking wounded, they would live anyway. Those who were so desperately injured, they would die anyway. And try to focus your attention on the ones who would live if you treated them and probably die if you didn't. Very, very crude, broad triage criteria. Today, they're much more sophisticated protocols. Unfortunately and tragically, most of the best triage protocols that are used throughout the world today were developed in Israel. Unfortunately, country facing terrorist threats and attacks, and so these are real-time issues, and the questions there are agonizing. Not so long ago, some of the first responders went to ask one of the rabbis in Israel, when we get to a mass casualty incident and we need to save people's lives, are we allowed to walk on dying people to get to someone we might save? That's a real question. You know, on the one hand, you might extinguish a life. On the other hand, you try to save lives. When there's an explosion and a building collapses, you bring in heavy machinery to dig out people. You deal with that all the time. You're moving earth or rubble of a building to excavate people. You might be crushing others on the way. These are some of the real-time agonizing triage questions we face. But in order to give you an insight into this fascinating and cutting-edge life and death problem, let me tell you about a question that arose, a very bizarre triage question. as it happens, arose some years ago in South Africa. And let's build on that scenario an approach to our question. And I'm going to ask you to solve some of the questions as we go through, right? Rabbi Fleschel, I'm sure all your students are intellectual black belts. And I'm sure I'll be able to answer the question. So here's the scenario. Picture the scene. In the Johannesburg hospital, and we're going back a number of years here, more than 20 years, the hospital has a very advanced, what Americans call an ER, emergency room. There it happens to be called an accident service. It's a trauma unit dedicated only to surgical trauma. It has a very advanced helicopter service. You're talking about a massive institution. The hospital building is 1 kilometer long. You can see it from outer space. So you're talking about the biggest building in Africa. You're talking about a massive institution, very, very busy trauma unit, bringing in people from hundreds of miles around in the helicopter service. And this unit found one of the young doctors working in that unit was a Jewish doctor rotating through emergency surgery. And here's the dilemma that he faced. The hospital had acquired a new machine. It was a new ventilator or ventilator resuscitator. And here's where we get to the COVID-related issues. I was no longer there. I was living in Israel, working as a doctor in Israel at the time. So I can't tell you the exact technology, but it was a very advanced, new, effective ventilator, giving patients a much better chance of survival. But the hospital issued a very peculiar instruction. The instruction was that no doctor on duty is allowed to use this machine on any patient whom he considers to be non-salvageable. In other words, if you can see that the patient's not going to make it no matter what you do, don't use the machine. Okay? Now, why do you think they would prevent or prohibit use of the machine in hopeless cases? What do you think the reason is? Type me an answer. Give me a one-line answer, please. Come on, think along with me. Why would they prohibit the use of such a machine on hopeless patients? Any options? 5 seconds for answers. Yes, Ezra, that's great. Yes, indeed, Aaron, quite correct. The concern was like this. Yes, I'm getting Catherine is saying because it's too expensive. Money, that's a very American answer. But when I present triage questions, do you save this patient or that one? The Americans usually tell me which one's got insurance. Okay, no, that's not the correct answer. But here's the consideration. The point was, if you got two people, you got one person comes in, the person's hopeless, and you put them on the machine. Obviously, the question is going to be, what happens half an hour later when somebody else arrives who could have been saved? Now you've got the first person who's dying committed to this machine, no longer available for the second person, right? That's the problem. Therefore, don't get into that odious situation. Simply do not use the machine on the first person, save it for the second. Well, the obvious challenge to that is, why don't you simply use the machine on the first person, and when the second person arrives, simply switch it off from the first person, put it on the second, right? What's wrong with that? No, another 5 seconds to answer. Why can you not take what's the problem with that? Simply switch off the machine on the first hopeless person and give it to the second. What's the objection to that? Yes, indeed, quite correct. And I'm getting a whole list of answers. You'd be killing the first person. This is not the reason the hospital gave. They said the reason we won't allow you to do that is because when you walk over to the first person on the machine and you switch it off, their family will object. You'll have an emotional family, newly injured person. There'll be scenes of chaos and hysteria. However, that's not a valid Jewish answer. A valid Jewish answer is what indeed you have said. You cannot switch off the machine on the first person, no matter how hopeless they are, because you'll be killing them. And in Judaism, ein dochin nefesh mipnei nefesh. You may not push aside one life for another. You'd not be allowed to kill the first person. So now let's rephrase the question in an authentic Jewish way. You're an emergency room doctor. You're working there. You got this newfangled machine. Somebody arrives. You check them out. You can see they're not going to make it. And I'm assuming that you can tell these things perfectly. Obviously, in real life, you cannot do that. But South African doctors can tell exactly how long people are going to live, right? Rabbi Yaakov, we get it down to the minute. American doctors, not so good. But assuming you could tell how long this person's going to live and you can get that exactly right, it's clear they only have hours to live, then is the right thing to put them on the machine, knowing that soon somebody else will arrive and you'll not be able to save them? Or is the right option from a Jewish point of view, stand back, don't use the machine, use older technology, do whatever you can, save the machine for the salvageable person who's coming in. Well, this young Jewish doctor did not know what the correct response was. He went to consult a world-famous rabbi who happened to be in South Africa at the time, and he discussed the case with him, and he added this critical information. He said, this hospital is so busy that the scenario is guaranteed. In other words, I have a statistical guarantee that if I put the first person on the machine while they're on it, someone else will arrive who could be saved. Now, I'm not going to argue tonight about whether we have the valid notion of statistical guarantee. I'm going to assume that we do. This is a discussion for another time. But I'm not giving you the option. I'm not saying maybe someone else will arrive. I'm talking about guaranteed. The person's not here yet. They'll be here in 10 minutes or half an hour or 40 minutes. But there's guaranteed second person who will arrive. Now, that's the scenario we're discussing right now. He even said guaranteed Jewish patient, but let's leave that out. This thing's complicated enough. So let me revise the question briefly. ER doctor, one machine, one patient comes in, hopeless patient. Do you put them on the machine knowing for sure that someone will arrive soon and die because you don't have the machine available? Or do you hold the machine in abeyance, let the first person die sooner, they were going to die anyway, and use the machine on the second guaranteed patient who's going to come in soon? Are we all clear about the dilemma, the question? Everyone got the question clear? Okay, good. Now, before I tell you the formal answer to this question, let's take a little tour through some triage issues, and then we'll use them to shine a light on this problem. The first thing to know is that triage is not simply a drama of two people in front of you. Triage is a much broader issue, And this is a COVID question directly. Triage is a question of society's needs. Society has needs, communities have needs in general, right? Is a country allowed to pay money for its parks and museums if it does not have enough emergency and military facilities? That's triage, right? Triage isn't only two people dying in front of me. It's a broad societal issue. And every community, even American hospitals, sometimes do not have enough transplantation and dialysis facilities for all their patients, right? These are big questions. So it isn't only countries like Israel or South Africa that have limited facilities. This can happen anywhere, and these are broad societal issues. I'll give you a fascinating illustration of this. Some years ago, there was a couple, Jewish couple, living in a certain European city. For many years, they found themselves unable to have children. Eventually, they ended up at a very good fertility unit at a Tel Aviv hospital, and they had a child. Now, the couple happened to be extremely wealthy. And the new father, in his joy at having a child, made a massive donation to the Tel Aviv hospital for the purpose of helping other people have children. The hospital director, you know, Israelis, they sometimes have their own very definite opinions. The Israeli hospital director said, no, that's immoral of you. You've no right to pay money to help people have children when I've got dying people who need to be saved. Jewish law, pikuach nefesh. So the man said, well, I'm not giving my money. You know, instead of just taking the money. That reminds me of the Panovich Yerov, who was a very famous and very shrewd rabbi in the previous generation. He once had a friend who was very wealthy and very generous, but Jewishly a little challenged. And this friend once promised the rabbi enough money to build an entire religious school, a yeshiva, provided that the rabbi would promise that the students would not have to wear these. Okay, promise me the students don't have to wear these, you have the money. Rabbi promised, he took the money and he built a girls' school. He built a Beis Yaakov, right? Now that's the way to handle those situations. But in this case, they couldn't agree. They ended up at Rav Elyashiv, great halachic authority, major rabbinic figure, maybe the leading rabbi in the world at the time. And the rabbi said the man's permitted to give his money to the fertility unit. So the hospital director said, Rabbi, don't you know Jewish law? Pikuach nefesh. How can you rule that this man's allowed to help people have babies when I've got dying people in front of us who need to be cured? Listen to what the rabbi said. He said, a country needs a normal spread of facilities. When you start funding only emergencies, then you give people an embattled mentality. That affects their morale. That is a life and death question as well. Now, you need very broad shoulders to be able to say that. But we're looking at the needs of a community. And so we're not simply talking about two people, the one on the right, the one on the left. We're talking about very broad issues. Okay. However, let us bring our discussion down to the immediate question of two people who are right in front of me. So here are my two people, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. Stay with me. Here are the two people. So let's say I walk into the room and there's two people. I'm an ER doctor. I've got one pair of hands, two people. Or you stop at an accident. I don't know if do Americans stop at accidents anymore? Probably not. They don't want to get sued, right? Well, when I live in England, they don't stop because they're too polite. But anyway, you know, there's been an accident. People are injured. You stop. You want to help people. You've got, and I've been in this situation as a doctor many times in my life. Every doctor's been challenged in these type of situations. You've got one pair of hands. People are bleeding. People are going to die. You can only make limited choices. So let's make it simple. There are two people, and you need to decide which one you're going to save. I want some suggestions from you, please. What would you use to distinguish or differentiate between the people? Give me some criteria. We said insurance is incorrect. Okay, leave out insurance. What else would you look at? Age, Jacob, age. Okay, age is a great suggestion. The Jewish answer to that is not clear at all. There are many rabbis who feel the young should get treated before the old. Some say the old before the young. Most secular ethicists say that a very young person should get saved before a very old person. The logic they use is they've already lived their life. The young person has not lived his life. Therefore, it's fair to give it to the young person. That's probably a valid criteria in Judaism, but I don't think it's the one that comes first. I'm getting a lot of you saying chance of survival. I'll come to that later. Let's put that aside for the moment. Let's say the equally threatened, equally in danger. What else would you use to tell between two people? Come on, any other suggestions? Gender, Julia, gender. No, yes, gender indeed. So now let me ask you, which gender, which gender would you save, male or female? Come on, tell me, would you save the man or the woman first? I've got a long list of people saying female. Let me see, are they all female? Yes, they appear to be. Okay, I assume you're a little prejudiced there. But anyway, female first. Why would you save the female before the male? Why would you save a woman before a man? No, tell me the answer to that. Because they can have children. Okay. I would like to inform you that men are also necessary. Men are also needed to have children, you know. So I don't think that's a valid answer. No, let me inform you that in Judaism, there's no priority of gender, not at all. Absolutely not, no. There's no gender priority in Judaism. If it's a man or a woman, we don't. Sometimes we have a gender priority when there's differential suffering. For example, the Talmud says that if people are captured by terrorists, let's say it's a terrorist hostage situation, and you can only save the men or the women, there we're obliged to save the women. The reason is because the women will almost certainly be sexually molested, and that is a suffering that the men are not subject to. And so it's not a question of value of life, it's a question of differential suffering. The Code of Jewish Law says that if the terrorists are homosexuals, you have to save the men, because that's an even greater indignity. We're not talking here about value of life, we're talking about differential suffering. But if the sufferings, by the way, let me ask you a question. Which of your parents comes first? Let's say you have to do a mitzvah of honoring a parent. Your parents want you to do something for them. Do you help your father first or your mother? No. What's the answer to that? Anyone know? I'm getting a whole bunch of people saying the father, and they all happen to be men. And I'm getting a whole lot of women saying you say. No, you know, here's the general answer. It depends what they want. So let's say your parents ask you for a cup of coffee at the same moment, exactly. You serve your father first. And I'll tell you why. Because one of a Jewish woman's marital duties is to present food to her husband. So your mother has a duty to present food to your father. And since it's food, your father comes first, because both you and your mother have that obligation. If, however, your parents need dignified clothes at the same time, your mother comes first. Because a Jewish husband has a duty to provide his wife with dignified clothing before him. And therefore your father and you have that obligation, right? I hope you see the logic of this. Which means there's no priority. If your parents are divorced, there's no priority at all. Parents living separately where there's no mutual obligation, Judaism posits no priority between mother or father at all. Equal claim. They're both responsible for bringing you into the world, and therefore there's no priority. So gender would not determine whose life you save. Okay, so we've had age, gender. What else? Come on, give me one or two other options. Anything else? Any other suggestions? Okay, impact on community, that's very logical. In fact, Rory, if they're nice. Well, well, I don't know how you know who's nice, but no, value to community is a valid option, not because their life is worth intrinsically more, but if we need them more, and in the present COVID situation, the most ethicists have said that we need to save the healthcare workers because they could go on to save other lives, and that's perfectly logical indeed. I'll tell you what comes first from a Jewish point of view. Probably the most basic of all is proximity. In other words, I walk into the room from here, and I've seen two people. This one close to me, and that one far away. So all else being equal, I'm required to treat the person who's closer to me. Okay? In other words, this is sort of a first come, first served that also is valid, but I'm talking about something more material than that. Somebody's 10 feet away and somebody's 20 feet away. According to Jewish law, you treat the person who is 10 feet away from you closer. Anyone know the reason? Anyone know the reason? Okay, here's the reason. There is a Jewish principle called Ein ma'avirin ala mitzvot. You're not allowed to bypass a mitzvah. Benjamin, that's the correct answer. You're not allowed to bypass a mitzvah. You can't walk past. You have a life-saving obligation in front of you now. You have no right to walk past that to an equivalent mitzvah that is more distant. Okay? That is a very, very basic law. Probably the first, comes way before any age issues and gender issues and all the things you spoke about. That is the question of priority, proximity. I'll give you a classic example. 1949, 1950, penicillin had just become available. And in Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem, there were 8 children with meningitis. Now, as you probably know, meningitis was a guaranteed death sentence, and the penicillin was a virtually guaranteed cure at the time. But there was only enough penicillin for 2 children. Okay, that was the dilemma. 8 kids dying of meningitis, only enough medicine for 2. The doctors did not know how to choose which 2 children to save. So they went to the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Herzog, and they said to him, Rabbi, how do we decide which one we save? The boy, the girl, how do we do this? Rabbi Herzog phoned Rav Moshe Feinstein in New York to talk it over with him. The phone call lasted 30 seconds. Rav Moshe said, tell the doctors to walk into the hospital ward and give it to the first child, the second child, and then you have no more. The first one you come to. Rav Herzog said, boy, girl, he said, totally irrelevant. Just walk into the room, give the first child the first dose, give the second child the second dose. That's it. So proximity would indeed come first. Okay, now let me ask you this. You walk into the room, they're both equidistant. One's your brother and one's a stranger. Who comes first? No, come on, give me the answer to that. Who comes first, brother or stranger? No, Benjamin, where's your answer? Yes, your brother comes first. Why does your brother come first? You know, because your mother will be upset. Why does your brother come first? The other fellow is somebody else's brother. Well, as all the rabbis on this panel know, the reason is, yes, indeed, Yisrael Meir, the Torah says, but where does it say it? Good answer. The good answer, the Torah says so. Where does the Torah say that your brother comes first? Indeed. The Torah says, Mibsarcha al tit'alem, do not ignore your flesh. It's a verse in the prophets, do not ignore your flesh. And therefore, you are required to treat a relative before a stranger. It's got nothing to do with whether you like them or not, by the way. A relative comes first. This extends to a neighbor, a friend, someone you have a relationship with, and someone who lives in your city. In fact, this is the very same criterion we use for apportioning charity. If you have a limited charity funds, the first money goes to a relative. You're required to support people with your charity who live in your city before people who live in other cities. You can equally prioritize Jerusalem or perhaps all of Israel because notionally we all live there. But we have concentric layers of responsibility, and so people you have a relationship with come before people who are more distant. This does not apply, by the way, in a hospital. You're working in a COVID hospital, you cannot treat your brother before someone else. You have no authority to do so or use the equipment. That's not valid. But if it were in the desert, someplace in the wilderness, and there's 2 people, your brother comes first. A Jew comes before a non-Jew, at least for this reason. You're more related to him, right? Now, we're not talking about being worth more and being better in any way, but since you are related to this person, you have Aviel, that's a very good suggestion. In fact, there is a section in the Talmud that says you ought to prioritize those who have more mitzvahs. So a Kohen becomes for a Levi before Yisrael. For that reason, indeed, a man might become for a woman. This is not practiced today. There are many reasons why it's not applicable. And although you are correctly quoting a section in the Talmud, there are many sources that override that consideration. Okay, so we have learned one priority is proximity, one priority is relationship, and we've suggested a number of others. Now, here's your real challenge. Here's your black belt challenge for tonight. And since I stayed up to 1:30 in the morning, I'll be very gratified if someone gives me the right answer. It will make it all worthwhile. What's the next question I'm going to ask you? What's the next dilemma I'm going to put to you? Which is the next triage element I'm going to ask you to solve? Now, use your logic, please. Use your black belt halachic logic. Both families, same proximity, Amy? No, that's not the right question. It's a good question, but it's not the right one. Come on, give me another one. Age, no. Ezra, great answer, great answer. Come on, somebody else, give me the answer. Somebody supports other people, fantastic point. In fact, that does come into it, but it's not the next question. Let me give you a clue. Let me give you a clue. David, are you with me? I see you thinking hard. Rabbi and father, great question, but not the next one. Let me give you a clue. We said priority number one is proximity. Priority number two is relationship. What's the next question you are forced to ask at this point?
Relationship?
No. Okay, here's the next question. What happens if your brother is further? Which priority takes priority? You get it? Sackets, you enjoyed that? Yeah. What happens? You walk into the room, one individual's closer, but your brother's further. Which priority takes priority? Proximity or relationship? This is a fascinating question. I'm going to tell you the answer, but not the reason. The answer is relationship comes first. You walk past the closer person and you treat your brother. And for homework, Rabbi Yaakov, am I allowed to give homework in this group? Okay, here's a homework exercise. Try to figure out why. Try to figure out why. Why do you bypass proximity to get to relationship? They're both Torah principles. They're both derived from text in the Torah. And therefore, I would like you to struggle to see if you can come up with an answer. And I'm sure for every correct answer, Rabbi Yaakov is going to buy you a whiskey or whatever Emory students are into these days. The point is that you are bypassing proximity to get to relationship. And I'd like you to think a little bit about what might be the reason for that. Okay, let's move to the next criterion. You walk into the room. One person is salvageable and one is not. All else equal, okay? Chaye sha'ah, that means they will die soon no matter what you do. Chaye olam, that means they'll live long term. So let's get this clear. There's two people. One has an underlying disease that is a lethal disease. They're going to die in a month's time for sure, no matter what you do. The other person is perfectly healthy. Right now they've been injured, they're bleeding to death. In 10 minutes, they'll both be dead. If you save the person who's healthy, they'll live in the long term. If you save the person with a lethal disease, they'll die in a month's time. Which one do you save, please? Long term or short term? Come on, the Americans would call this a no-brainer. Yes, you save the long-term person. Absolutely, we have many, many sources for that. Now here comes the challenge. Focus with me. You walk into the room, there's a short-term survival person who's closer to you and a long-term survival more distant. Okay, now the person who's closer to you could live for 3 months or 6 months. Short-term survival in Jewish law is called a year. That's called Chaye Shah without going into derivation. So here's a person who can only live for a week or a month or a few months, but more distant is a person who can live in the long term. Ordinarily, you do anything to save a life in the short term. Save someone for 3 months, of course. You spend any amount of money, you take risks, you do anything to save their life. But here's somebody who has a priority, but they're further away. What do? No? Tell me, short-term survival or long-term? Yes, you bypass the short-term person. This is Jewish law. And you get to the long-term person. That takes priority. Unless the closer person is conscious. If the terminally ill patient is conscious, you're not allowed to walk past them. Why not? Why not? Give me one word. What will be the consequence if you walk past them? What will they feel? Definitely, they'll feel despair. I'm hopeless, I'm dying, they can't help me. And for that reason, you walk past them. You're not allowed to walk past them. But if they're unaware, they're unconscious, you walk past the short-term person and you get to the long-term, okay? And that's very clear. We have very clear sources for that in the Talmud. I don't have time now to go through the sources. So just make the assertion, you are bypassing the closer person to get to the long-term person. Now, here comes the key to our whole discussion. Are we all still together? Everyone with me? Yeah, I'm making sense? Aaron, you with me? Okay. So here comes the key, right? Stay with me. Look what's happening. You're walking past a closer person to get to a more distant person, when the person closer to you ordinarily needs to be saved. It's a mitzvah of life-saving. A life-saving mitzvah, pikuach nefesh. We break Shabbat for that. We do anything for that. But in this case, you're ignoring the mitzvah. Why? Because there's another person more distant who takes priority. Now, here comes the rule. And this is the key. One thing you walk away from today's discussion, it should be this. Whenever you bypass a mitzvah to save a life, for example, you bypass Shabbat, you eat unkosher food, you eat on Yom Kippur, I presume you all know that for saving a life in Judaism, you do almost anything, except for murder, immorality, and idolatry. Those are three things you may not do. But anything else, you eat on Yom Kippur, you eat unkosher food, you break Shabbat, anything else you do breaking in order to save a life, okay? So there's one condition that needs to be present, and it's this. And please, one thing you need to remember. Whenever you wish to override a mitzvah like Shabbat to save a life, the life that you're trying to save must be here now. That's called a choyle lefanenu. There must be a real present person now. Can you do research on Shabbat to save lives later? No. You can break Shabbat if there's somebody now. Can you eat unkosher food because it may save lives down the line? No, that's below the red line. Okay? You cannot break Shabbat. To break Yom Kippur or Shabbat or any other aspect of Judaism, you do it immediately, but only if there's a real, identified, specific life to be saved now. Okay? Example. Here's an example. You're working in a hospital, right, in Atlanta, Rabbi Yaakov, and you get a patient who comes in who's got a weird disease. They're flashing like a neon light, and they've got yellow squares all over their body. You probably don't even see that in Atlanta, right? Okay. Suddenly the patient dies. Whoa, the doctors will all like to do an autopsy and get their hands on the patient's liver and spleen. It's nothing doing in Jewish law. You cannot cut up a dead body in Judaism. Can't do a post-mortem dissection. Cannot desecrate a dead body. Definitely not. So you prepare the patient for burial. Suddenly the patient in the next bed starts flashing and gets yellow squares. Judaism requires you to go and find the first person and cut him up now. Why? Because there's a person in front of us now whose life's in danger. How much danger? Irrelevant. How much chance of saving them? Irrelevant. But there's a real person here now. That's called the choyle lefanenu. Once there's somebody here now, we do anything. Cut up a body, break Shabbat, eat unkosher food. Is this principle clear? Yeah, everyone? Okay, that's called the choyle lefanenu. Now, next step. What's called in front of us? Same room, same hospital, same city, same county. What's called in front of us? So here, the sources that talk about this make it plain. We're not talking about geographical closeness. We're talking about real identified individual. I'll just give you two examples. United States today, transplants, right? Transplants, okay? They are done by a national computerized matching list. People, 2 kidneys are taken in Emory Hospital this morning. Who's going to get them? Somebody on a waiting list in the United States. In some states, the kidney, one can cross a state line and one cannot. There's all sorts of ways of apportioning organs, but there's a national computerized matching list, and some recipient is waiting for an organ. Where is he? Irrelevant. He may be 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away. That's called lefanenu. Do you see the concept? It's not the closeness in distance. It's the known, identified. Let me give you the most extreme example I can think of. 1986, a baby was born in California, Northern California, in heart failure. Baby had no hope, certainly was dying. The surgeon happened to be a famous heart surgeon called Norman Shumway, and he decided for the first time in history to attempt to transplant a heart into a newborn baby. What is the most difficult part of transplanting a heart into a newborn? No, Rory, I see you into this. Come on, what's the hardest part of transplanting a heart into a newborn? You tell me. Smallness? Nope. Yes. Where do you find a heart for transplantation? Where do you find a heart for a newborn? Most hearts for transplantation come from 18-year-old young men who've ridden their motorcycles into walls at 100 miles an hour. The American surgeons call them donor cycles. Okay. Now, there's not too many newborns riding their motorcycles into walls. So where do you find a heart for transplantation for a newborn? They searched the entire United States and they found a baby available to be a donor in Vermont. You know, as well as I do, that Vermont is 3,000 miles away from California, but there was no other hope. So they hired a private jet in California. They put the youngest doctor in the team into this private jet. They flew him across the country to Vermont. He cut out the heart of the donor child in Vermont and put it into an ice-cold solution to keep it viable. And they could not get the plane started to get him back to California. They had a technical fault with the plane. They couldn't get it started. They ended up scrambling United States Air Force supersonic fighter, put this terrified young doctor in the back of a supersonic fighter with a heart in a box on his lap. When they got back to California, they had to resuscitate the doctor, but they saved the life of the baby in California. Now that 6,000-mile trip in Jewish law is called lefanenu. That's called in front of us. The point is, it's not a distance question. It's a question of a real, identified individual now who needs the treatment. Lefanenu. Are we all clear about this principle? Yes? Okay. Let's go back to our original question. I'm going to invite you to solve the problem. Okay? Sit on the edge of your seat for this. Put your black belt attention, focus on this, and see if you can solve the question. Remember our question? South African, Johannesburg Hospital, newfangled machine. We got a person coming in who's not salvageable. We got this new machine. We want to know if you should use the machine or not. Okay? So let's get this clear. Let's say it's 8 o'clock in the morning. You're a trauma surgeon. You walk in there, you sit down, and you study your page of Daf Yomi Talmud like every good trauma surgeon does. And while you're busy, they say, doctor, somebody badly injured. You rush over, you check out this patient. You can see there's no hope for them at all. Absolutely no chance of survival. Hopelessly injured, hopelessly unconscious, dying. But there's newfangled machine next to them that could prolong their life to some extent. As you're about to put the machine on, you notice that the door opens and you see them wheeling in a salvageable patient. Salvageable. Chaye olam. If you give that person the machine, they'll live in the long term. Now tell me, who gets the machine? The patient who's closer to you is hopeless, or the patient at the door who's more distant, who is, has a chance? Tell me, which patient gets the machine? Oh, great question, man, Benjamin. Great question, man. Great question. This patient is hopelessly unconscious, completely unaware, totally unconscious. Good question. Who gets it? Yes, the more distant chance. We said that, right? We said you bypass proximity to give it to the more distant one, provided they're here, in front of us. Great, excellent. Let's go a little bit further. The next day, 8 o'clock in the morning, come on duty, badly injured patient, hopeless, here's the machine. The radio, the phone rings. And on the phone, they tell you the ambulance is on its way. 10 miles away in the ambulance is a salvageable patient. Wait 10 minutes, they'll be here, you'll save a life. Do you wait? Yes or no? Anyone? Of course. Benjamin, why don't you wait? Isn't 10 minutes away called in front of us? No? Didn't we say that 6,000 miles is called in front of us if there's somebody known and present? Amy, 10 minutes is not now, but they're on their way and there's a definite specific person 10 minutes away. We said you go to the more distant one if there's a salvageable more distant one who's present. Is this clear? I gave you an example of 6,000 miles and you were happy with that. Again, please, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this clear. There's a person here now who's dying. There's a person 10 minutes away who's guaranteed to live if I save them. You see that? We said you go to the more distant one, right? I hope this is clear. Let's go one step further. 8 in the morning, Catherine, I'll tell you whose blood is redder. They're all else equal. The only difference is one person is going to die in the short term and one person is going to die in the long term. The Torah says long-term life is worth more than short-term life, all else being equal. Absolutely, all else equal. Okay, next step. 8 in the morning, come on duty. Badly injured person, no hope. You're about to put the machine on. The radio crackles to life. And on the radio, they tell you that the helicopter's on its way. 150 miles away in the helicopter is a salvageable patient. Wait for an hour, they will be here. Do you wait or not? No, give me the answer. Of course you wait. We said that if there's a person who's specific and identified, okay, they're in the helicopter on the way, you go to the person who's, you wait for them. That's clearly what we studied. Okay, now here comes the challenge. Please, okay? And if this question doesn't move you, there's no hope for you. Here's the question. 8 o'clock in the morning, badly injured patient, no hope of survival. Here's your newfangled machine. No door opens, no phone call, no radio call. There's a statistical guarantee that somebody's going to be here soon. Is a statistical lefanenu called lefanenu? Is the guarantee of somebody, there's no person yet. Where's this individual? Mumbling at his wife from behind the newspaper, the breakfast table, not knowing that in 10 minutes he's going to run into a truck on the highway. But it's guaranteed. We guaranteed it specifically, right? We gave you a statistical guarantee. Is a statistical lefanenu called lefanenu? What do you say? What do you say to that? Okay, let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you what happened. The rabbi gave an answer to this young doctor. In fact, the answer that he gave was, I agree with the hospital. From a Jewish law perspective, that is called in front of us. That's, you don't have to lose your job and be disciplined. You can wait for the second person. They're guaranteed, right? Remember, this is not a maybe. This is a guarantee. And therefore, I think they're right. The question was then referred to another world famous rabbi in Jerusalem at the time. And he said, I disagree. No, treat the patient who's here. What happens in 10 minutes, you'll have to deal with that then. And the third opinion, which I'll finish with, and then I'll stop for questions, was something quite outlandish, bizarre, almost unbelievable, but in fact has become a reality. The third opinion was a famous rabbi in Bnei Brak, and he said, here's the correct solution. Take your newfangled machine and attach to it a clock and a bell. And here's what you do. As soon as the first person arrives, without a moment's hesitation, put them on the machine. The clock starts running. Half an hour later, the bell rings to warn you, the machine switches off. Quickly switch it on again. The machine runs for another half hour, rings a bell to warn you, and switches off. Keep doing that till the second person arrives. When the second person arrives, wait till the bell rings and switches off the machine, and instead of starting it on the first person, simply start it on the second. I see some doubtful faces. Anyway, when the rabbi suggested that, it sounded outlandish. But believe it or not, it's about to happen. I gave a talk to the ethics committee at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. They told me they're now considering putting timed cutoffs on all their intensive care ventilators. So when people are about to die, no one will have to walk in and switch off the machine. They'll just wait till the machines switch off by themselves. Hadassah Hospital, together with Shaarei Tzedek, has built a machine like this. It's been used on non-human models, and it was working quite well. They recently ran a human trial, and there's no question in my mind that very soon these machines will be rolled out. And coming to a hospital near you soon are going to be machines on timers. Let me finish just by explaining the purpose of these machines so you don't misunderstand. This is not a cowardly way of switching off machines because we don't want to do it ourselves. That's out the question. I'll just give you two cases where the machine could in fact be used. And I think you'll see the logic of this. And I'm not asking you to agree with this, by the way, although extreme right-wing rabbinic approval has been given to these machines. I just want you to understand, because I'm sure that these are going to come into general use quite soon. No one's using them yet, but I think it's inevitable that they will. I'll give you two quick scenarios and I'll stop for questions. Number one, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're an ER doctor. A person comes in, 80 years old, smoking for 50 years, terrible lungs, is respiratory failure. He needs to be put onto a ventilator. I can tell you I've been in these situations and it's heartbreaking. Here's the problem. You know that if you put the person on a machine, you may never get him off. He may languish on this machine for 3 months and then die in agony and misery. And during that time, you don't have the machine for other people. On the other hand, he may recover. So what do? So here's what you do. You try your best to diagnose the ones who look like they'll recover. And you put them on the machine. And the others you send home to die. This is a nightmare situation for doctors, but there's no other way out of it. Here comes the new solution. Much better solution. As soon as that person comes in respiratory failure, You put them on the machine right away, but you say, my dear sir, this machine only runs for 3 days, and then it cuts off automatically. During these 3 days, we'll give you antibiotics, we'll treat you aggressively. If you turn out to be somebody who's recovering, we'll keep the machine going. But if you turn out to be hopeless, in 3 days' time, we'll just stand back, we'll let the machine switch off, we'll give it to somebody else. And in case you accuse us of using the machine to kill people, we didn't use it to kill him, we gave him 3 extra days. We gave him treatment that he wouldn't have had otherwise. Do you see the logic of this? I hope you all see the logic. And here's one more example, and I'll finish with this. 3 in the morning, you're an ER doctor, you get a person very ill, elderly, all sorts of medical complications, pretty much hopeless, and the family tell you that this person said they never want to be resuscitated. There's a DNR on this person, but it's 3 in the morning, there's nothing in writing, you're not sure what to do, so you intubate them, you put them on a machine. 8 o'clock the next morning, the grandson walks in with a legal document showing you, signed by the patient, they never wanted to be resuscitated. Now you're in trouble. In Jewish law, you cannot switch off a machine. You can't kill somebody. Now you're in big trouble. Not with the new machines. The machine only runs for a day or a few hours. Cool. When it switches off, it switches off. Yeah, that you couldn't do yourself, but you could use a machine for that. Okay, this is a summary of some of the advances in the field. I'm going to stop now, Naftali and Rabbi Yaakov, in case anyone has any questions. But I think this is and in COVID triage, of course, these will be the principles. The one thing we will not agree with in COVID is that the ethicists have suggested, major authorities have suggested, that if the COVID situation gets so bad that we don't have enough machines, we will actually switch off machines on people who look hopeless, actively switch them off, killing the people, and put the machines on other people. That's completely unacceptable in Judaism. You cannot ever do something that kills somebody actively or shortens their life. You don't have to put them on the machine in the first place under certain circumstances. You can prioritize other people in the first. But once someone's on a machine, to switch it off and kill them immediately, that you cannot do in Judaism. That's a major disagreement we will have with the ethical principles that are being used in the COVID situation. Fortunately, yeah.
I understand regarding COVID, but in our scenarios, it sounded like the patient was a treifa. If the patient's a treifa, then halachically, why would there be a problem to remove the machine?
Okay, here we get a learned question about a treifa. First of all, Benjamin, not every dying person is a treifa. Okay, so
but your scenario sounded like there's no hope for the patient.
I'll explain. Give me a moment. A person who's dying with no hope is not a treifa. They may be called a goises. A treifa is somebody who has particular internal injury, organ injury. Again, a treifa is somebody who's been injured in a particular fashion, like an animal that has damage to an organ. Somebody who's medically ill and dying is not called a treifa. Secondly, you cannot kill a treifa. You can't switch treifa, goises. You cannot kill somebody in Jewish law under no circumstances to actively terminate their life. That you're never allowed to do, treifa or not.
Can a ghost be a treifa at the same time?
Certainly, absolutely. There's 2 kinds of treifas, treifa b'dei Adam, treifa b'dei Shamayim. This is a learned discussion I don't want to get into now, but nobody in Jewish law can you walk over and actually kill it. In fact, a ghost is somebody we don't even touch for fear of extinguishing their life. Not even to save another life. You cannot kill somebody in Jewish law. Yes.
Rabbi Tatz, can you just, because some people are asking, can you just define what a treifa is and a goses?
Okay. Yeah. So this learned question from Benjamin. A treifa is somebody who has certain lethal injuries. Actually, the term comes from animals, which makes an animal unkosher. But the notion of a treifa is somebody who's inevitably dying. And in Jewish law, technically, if you killed a treifa, although it's totally forbidden and murder, you would not be subject to the same legal penalty because the person was in the course of death anyway. A goises is a very interesting category. That is somebody on the verge of death, within hours of death. And there the Talmud says that's a person who's gurgling, they cannot clear their secretions, they're gasping, they're actually dying now. And this is a unique category in Jewish law. When a person enters that category, you're not allowed to touch them at all. And the Talmud says the reason is that a person in that situation is like the last faint ebb of a candle flame just before it's extinguished. Any perturbation might extinguish it. And we don't want to do that because you'd be killing the patient. And so when a person enters that state in Judaism, we don't touch them at all. You can't move the person because that might actually be extinguishing their life. Yes, any other questions that I can answer, I'll be glad to do so if I can.
Until when do you consider Lithuania? Like, how far does it percent? I know we discussed that it has to be like 6,000 miles away, but let's say in regards to COVID patient, you have two patients that walk in same time and they both need a ventilator. So what do you do? In the cases that you brought, there was always like one person. I'm saying there was one person that came in that you can save. So I'm just a little confused when it comes to Lithuania.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, Rabbi Schachter read about this recently, and he said, he put it like this. He said, let's say in your hospital there's a COVID person right in front of you in the ER, but you know they're hopeless. Okay, you put them on the machine, they're going to be hopeless anyway. And there's somebody on the way in right now in the ambulance. He's a few miles away, and he is a patient who would survive. That's called infronomy. And he ruled in those circumstances, right, you can wait the 10 minutes for the second person to get you. So those are the kinds of things we're talking about. But the basic concept is there's specific individual life that you're going to save. Okay, that's called in front of us. It doesn't matter if he's 10 minutes away or a mile away. That's the general notion. But we won't break Jewish law for somebody who's not extant at the moment. Oh, by the way, I should add this. In an epidemic or a situation where it's almost inevitable, that could be, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have an ambulance on Shabbat, and the ambulance is called to a distant part of the city. Okay, now the question is, they've dealt with the patient, they've saved them. Is the ambulance allowed to drive on Shabbat back to a central location? And the answer is, if it's a big city where most times on Shabbat the ambulance is called, yes. There's no one who needs it now, but that inevitability is called in front of us. In Israel, on a moshav or a kibbutz, so they've got a medic or a doctor, they go out to the periphery. Let's say maybe they need to drive to deal with somebody. Can they come back to the central location? Yes, if most times on Shabbat they are called, then we wouldn't take a chance on saving life. So we have such a concept of virtual inevitability. We also extended one step further, by the way. If people travel to save a life on Shabbat, believe it or not, they're even allowed to travel back. Why? Even though there's no life to be saved now, because we're concerned that if you tell a person, if you go to save a life, you'll be stuck there. Next Shabbat, they may not be prepared to go out and save a life. And we won't take any chance on that, right? So that's another scenario where the general principle in Judaism, we prioritize life saving over virtually anything else. Any other questions?
There are some questions in the chat from Amy.
Oh, give me a moment, please. Give me a moment. Give me a sec. 3 days, live or not? More than 3 days would have helped them live. Oh, Amy, that's a great question. When I said 3 days for a person who got lung disease, really the period we would choose is the one relevant to know when they would recover. Most people with badly damaged lungs who have a pneumonia, within 3 days, you more or less tell if they're responding to the antibiotics. Usually, that's a rough. For babies, it will be different. And in fact, these new machines, no one's actually worked out these protocols yet. If it's a week, then a week. I mean, we're not looking to kill people. But what we would do is give them enough use of the machine to make it absolutely clear that there's no hope for them before then prioritizing somebody else. And in fact, I'm sure there'll be big discussions and arguments about these. Cases in the book you show, yeah, well, this is the book that I showed you. And each chapter actually has cases you can work through. So I suggest you get a copy of the book. If you buy 2 copies, then you'll understand it extra well. Mental illness. Well, let me say this about mental illness. Serious mental illness is considered a threat to life in Judaism. Not only the type of situation where somebody might be considering suicide, but a major mental disintegration is called a threat to life in Jewish law. Absolutely, quite correct. Oh, that's a good question. Software that can determine who gets the organ. Do you think of an AI Sanhedrin? Well, artificial intelligence is being used in Jewish law, has a number of applications. But we always, when it comes to a life and death decision, we need a ruling. I'll just give you one fascinating insight here. Rabbi Asher Weiss has pointed out. Israeli demographics are proceeding in the direction that it's not inconceivable that within a short period of time, we might have a majority religious government in Israel. Think about that for a moment. Imagine that the Orthodox world in Israel, right, with its birth rate being higher than the secular world, imagine a few years' time when the majority of voters in Israel are observant Jews, and you have an Orthodox observant government in Israel for the first time in more than 2,000 years. You'll have Orthodox Jews, rabbis, having to make decisions about how to run an army, how to run a police force, bomb disposal. I mean, can you imagine? This is a kind of thing that since the days of King David, the Jewish people have not had to handle, right? And we may find ourselves in that situation. Indeed, that'll be a real challenge for the rabbinic authorities. Rabbi Hanfling, thank you for putting that reference up about the book. Mental illness, triage, non-suicidal. Okay, a suicidal patient in Jewish law. See, the complication there is that if a person wants to kill themselves, do you have the same obligation to save them as somebody else suffering, for example, from cancer? See, the problem is this person is doing away with their own life. Let me put it a bit more technically. One of the sources we use in order to save life is the mitzvah of returning a lost object to a person. Very interesting. The Torah obliges you to return a lost object to an owner. So the Talmud says that certainly applies to their health. A person who's ill, returning their well-being to them is at least as much a priority as returning some object to them. Now here comes, I presume that's clear to everyone, right? If I'm obliged to return your book to you, right, or your some object to you, I'm certainly obliged to return your health to you. But here comes the complication. If you don't want your object back, I have no mitzvah to return it. Let's say I see you take a book and you throw it out into the street. I have no obligation to return it to you. I have only an obligation to return you to something you want. So how about a person who's about to throw their life away? Maybe you don't have an obligation to return it to them. You see the logic. However, we rule that if indeed you are obliged to save a person who's trying to commit suicide, right? You are obliged to do that. Of course, there's limits to it. I mean, sometimes you're powerless, but in Jewish law, we are doing almost anything to dissuade somebody from a suicidal effort, and you make any effort you can indeed. So, but it's not only suicide, a person with a major emotional breakdown, severe depression, right? That is considered intrinsically a threat to life as well. Okay, Rabbi Yaakov, is that it for tonight?
I'm just seeing if there are any other questions. Rabbi Hanfling had that one question with the kidney.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see a question about a kidney. Can you tell me what that question is, Rabbi Hanfling?
Yeah, meaning if we know that there are people that need kidneys and their basically life depends on it, and we all have an extra kidney that we can give, so why do we not have a chiyuv to give our kidney?
Okay, that's a great question. Maybe we'll finish with this with your permission. So here's the rule. The rule is when you can do something to save a life, you're obliged to do it, but not at risk to yourself. Not at risk to yourself. So if it's giving blood, for example, or giving plasma at the moment, there's a hardcore obligation to do it when there's specific people who need that. To say, I don't want to give blood, I'm squeamish, you can't do that. The risk to yourself is so minimal by giving blood, you would be obliged to do it. Giving bone marrow is a little bit more complicated. When you talk about giving a kidney, that is already significant risk. Very small risk, but it's a measurable risk. Giving a kidney falls into the category that is so risky that you're not obliged to, but so safe that you may. That puts you in a position of making the choice. So if I need your blood for a transfusion, I say, Rabbi Naftali, you're obliged to give your blood to save my friend's life. When it comes to a kidney, I say, if it comes to something like a liver or a lung, which is much more risky to you, then you can say, listen, Rabbi Tatz, I'm not giving my lung, I'm not risking my life. Correct. Kidneys are very safe. Measurable risk, significant risk, but very safe. The halachic attitude to that level of risk is safe enough that you're allowed to, risky enough that you're not obliged to. And that enters us into the zone of how does the person make a choice? And how much pressure can I put on you to make a choice to save somebody else's life? We don't have time to go into that fully now, but the bottom single nutshell answer to your question is something like a kidney is certainly an incredible mitzvah to give a kidney, but it's in the category of risk that there's no way that you can be obliged to do so. We strongly encourage it. It's an amazing thing to do. Let me finish with this inspiring message. Here's an inspiring message. Giving organs after death, like a heart, for example, the Orthodox Jewish community has a very low risk of donation. Sorry, a very low rate of donation. We are among the most reticent to give organs after death for many reasons. We have by far the highest rate of giving live kidneys. Do you know that? The Jewish world, the Israeli Jewish world, the Orthodox world, both in America and in Israel, by far most kidneys, and many of those kidneys are given with no directed recipient at all, right? I've had a number of people come to see me. I don't want to give my kidney to anybody. Amazing thing. The most recent case was a mother of 6 children, right? She's 39 years old. She told me, listen, I want to give a kidney. I had to hold her down. Let's just think about this for a moment, right? So we have, Rabbi Weiss says he's proud of the fact that Orthodox Jews are coming forward en masse to give very high rates of altruistic kidney donation. Again, we have good reasons why not to give organs after death, because of the definition of death problems and a number of issues. But giving kidneys while alive, certainly permissible halachically, an amazing thing to do, and I'm proud to say that it's very, very often done. Rabbi Pincus, for example, he went and gave a kidney without telling his family. Do you know that? He told him he's going away for 3 weeks. He came back after giving a kidney to an unspecified recipient. Anyway, Rabbi Yaakov, Rabbi Naftali, thank you very much for this opportunity. I hope that you people in the evening in New York and the afternoon in California, whatever it is, those in California can get back to their surfing now. New Yorkers, I don't know what you do with your time, but it's a pleasure speaking to these bright young people. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best.